Good afternoon and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 105 degrees here and a beautiful June day. We appreciate everyone's time and we're going to jump right in. It is a true privilege. I've been actually looking forward to this for quite some time. Our guest tonight, first of all, if this is the first time you've joined one of our Cirrus continuing education courses, welcome. We do go out to the entire North American market. We look for some of the most unique and influential speakers across North America. And tonight definitely is no exception. So here's the interesting story with Frank, which I like to call as a great friend, as we've been through lots over the years. Frank's story is pretty unique. And I thought would be perfect on today's conversations for a ton of mid-career doctors that are overwhelmed with the stress, the frustration, the challenges, and the business of dentistry. And I would argue no one knows the ins and outs of the companies that provide the business of dentistry to the corporations that build, like Henry Schein, that build a business of dentistry platform, which Frank ran, but also then how it actually flows through the clinical side. So, quick background on my good friend Frank here is started dental assistant, dentistry of children over 20 years ago with some additional internships, then ended up as a dental assistant at Oakwood Dental. And I'll come back to why that's important in a second. Then joined the wild world of field sales for the Henry Schein organization. Then went into the business consulting specialist for Henry Schein back in 2015, senior business consulting specialist, then district manager, senior training and recruitment management manager, senior manager for practice services, and now and then prior to that was the director of business and staffing services. Then back to the clinical side as the COO from the same Oakwood Dental that Frank worked previously, and now full circle back with the Great Henry Schein organization as a transition sales consultant. Whew, Frank, did I miss anything?
It's a lot of scrolling on LinkedIn. Apologies for that.
Well, it's a true privilege, Frank. Maybe just to kick it off at a high level, Frank, you've arguably seen it all, done it all. What's your perception of the current state of dentistry from your perspective?
It's definitely been a journey within dentistry, and the experience I've had on the clinical side it's so helpful here in my current role. And overall, it's not to sound cliche. I think it's an amazing time to be in dentistry. It's funny enough. I was talking to an attorney locally here. He runs a national law firm, but talking within my market and across the board, we're seeing more doctor-to-doctor transactions happening right now. In my market in particular, I'm talking to a multitude of dental buyers, and these are the residents or associates a couple years in, and they're looking to become entrepreneurs, own their business. They're working well with lenders. We're seeing lenders financing practices and or dental startups. It's a beautiful time to be in dentistry. There's of course an amazing need for it, and it's a privilege to still be a part of it and help the community.
Fantastic. So we are live. We will record and then it chops up and whatnot. I know a ton of these are just recorded beforehand. We are live, so feel free to throw in some. I pulled up a little intro poll. Give us a little background on your situation. We're happy to customize as we go through, and I'll put Frank on the spot here to run through some questions. We've got some good Q&A and everything else across the board. It's my privilege as the owner and CEO of Cirrus to run a lot of these courses. The whole premise and theme behind it is doctors, look, you're not alone in all of this. The stresses, the frustrations, the walking out of the clinic with your hands in your head, or the fact that, the perception is that the staff doesn't care about you, the business, etc., and that they'll move across the street for an extra couple of bucks a square foot, right? Let alone the staffing issues across the board. So what we've done tonight to structure the course and the education side is first of all, we will process the CE credits roughly 10 business days after you've joined, but we wanted to structure it in a way to help make sure that it provided some good info. It looked at some of the key challenges today, and while we're not going to solve all the world's problems, hopefully you'll get some good knowledge pearls across the board from Frank's now over 20 years in the dental space, many of which is a huge supporter of our Cirrus Consulting Group. Frank, maybe again, I'll put you on the spot again. How would you introduce Cirrus. So I always get the privilege of doing it, but if you're sitting next to a doctor on the elevator, what's an easy way to explain what the heck a crazy business that just does these dental office leases
Sure.
actually does?
Crazy is the word. No, the Cirrus has expertise, and I think the key word is expertise in tenant representation and lease negotiation. I think, and I meet with more dentists than I can count, and I've had in my career. And the lease is a significantly important part of the business, of the life cycle of that dental practice. You're signing typically a 10-year term. Rent is the second highest piece of overhead. And instead of working with the average attorney who might negotiate a couple of leases a year, you really want to work with individuals and vendors who are dental specific and who are constantly involved in this aspect of lease negotiation, particularly within dentistry. 80% of dental offices are in a lease space. Cirrus does more lease reviews and negotiations than anybody around the country and in Canada. And I couldn't recommend a better expert to consult and who has consulted my clients along the way.
Perfect. Dr. L, thanks for the chat. The chat is open as well. Appreciate all the support. And yeah, chat's open for any questions. Let us know what part of the country you're coming in from, as well as any Q&A. We're happy to go to run through as we start through. So yeah, really appreciate it. I mean, again, Frank's perspective here is pretty unique. So let's touch on that a little bit. The lease, Frank, is meaning so many different things to so many different dentists. Frank, let it be from your field sales size to running the practice services team for Shine to then back on the actual practice operations and now transitions, especially from a DSO. What's your answer, Frank? What is a lease?
What is a lease? It states all of the terms of what you can and cannot do within your practice, I would say, if you don't own that space in particular. Eric, we can probably piggyback off some real life stories of the pitfalls I've seen in the dental office lease along the way. But it really is, it dictates everything that could happen, even installing equipment and technology in that space. You might think, well, it's yours, it's your practice, I can do what I want. I wish I could say that were the case, but unfortunately, I've seen it too many times that it is not. And you have to make sure the terminology in that lease is best suited for the type of dentistry that you are doing.
Yeah, bang on. And it's Frank, you've seen the good, the bad, the ugly. I mean, the old cardinal truth that we come back to is the funny part is it's that check, right? Beyond everything, I agree 100%, but it's the biggest check that you will sign in your personal and professional career. And it's typically one that's the most likely overlooked. We've done a huge multi-year strategic plan, Frank, and just running through the numbers, roughly 500 doctors every single day across the country are signing a lease renewal in between patients and not even reading it, looking at it, negotiating, etc. Doctors, as Frank was mentioning, I mean, ultimately, there's such a misconception about leverage and, oh, the landlord's got me over a barrel, or Frank, I just don't know. And, the landlord, it's going to cost me so much to relocate. But the flip side that we've talked about for years is, again, some of the highest build out costs on the planet is the dentist. Lowest default rates at 0.5%. Are in the same location for 26 and a half years. So Frank, why do we see upwards of 64% of dentists overpaying in rent? What are your thoughts there? Because everyone's got a different perspective, especially the dentist. But why do you think dentists specifically consistently are getting pushed by the landlord and are paying so much more than they should?
I think they just don't know, right? They're not looking at the data. I believe we get into the specifics of why data is necessary here. But again, it comes down to your partnerships. I don't think and no knock to a dentist, right? Their expertise is within dentistry, and it is not their responsibility to be their lease negotiator and understand fair market rental rates. And I see it quite often. It's very difficult to move a dental practice, as you said. And the closer you get to a renewal, if you don't plan on leaving that practice, the landlord is unlikely to negotiate with you. And I've seen too many times where they fail to have that timely conversation, and often at times it's too late. Landlord comes in, increases rental rates. There's nothing they could do. because they're not going to move that practice. They're not going to pick up the equipment, and the location for them might be ideal, right? So I think it just comes down to the partnership from day one, negotiating that lease, understanding fair market rate, and being prepared at the time of renewal.
Bang on. Let's look at that now, Frank. I'm most curious, especially when you left the corporate side, went to clinical, and then back, and now advising those doctors in the clinical role, thinking of transitioning. So, obviously, we'll touch on some of the real estate side, but all pieces of data. Like as you were getting in on the clinical side, what were some of the first reports you were looking at? What were some of the ways that, again, if you're now looking at it as the advisor side was Shine for years on the business of dentistry, what were you advising then? And then what was your interesting perspective as you suddenly now got on the clinical side?
Sure. So, some background on that. So I was the COO of a 9 location group. We had 8 locations when I started. We had acquired a practice. We grew 13% the first year. I hired myself, over 70 people, half of which were clinical, the other half admin. And we rebuilt the entire tech stack in the almost 2 years that I was there. For me, at the end of the day, most dentists, they spend too much time working in the business and not on it. Because if you're the owner, most of that time, you're also a wet-handed dentist. So for me as an operator, I'm coming in and I have to know every aspect of the business. And we actually engage in an analytics company. We're pulling fee schedules, we're pulling P&Ls, and I really had to look at it from a macro level to say at a 10,000-foot view, where do we currently stand, location by location, whether you're 1 location or 10, where does each location stand against industry benchmarks? Constantly a dentist might say, well, I need to save my way to prosperity. While there is ways to do that, my recommendation is balancing your overhead, comparing that to industry standard. And that's really how you find the opportunity, right? You prioritize the need. And in many cases, it's a production issue too. You have the patients that are there, we're just not capturing the dentistry. So I'm looking at hygiene. I know we're moving away from the topic at hand, but it's so important because we have to understand, what does our recare program look like? What are the cliche systems? Do we have them in place? And is our staff abiding by the systems? Are we collecting money? Right? What is that check in and check out experience? But you need to understand the data. You need to pull your KPIs, your key performance indicators to do it. And unfortunately, in the industry we're in, many dentists don't know how to fully utilize that practice management software. So I would recommend educate yourself, know those top KPIs, and look at them day in and day out because they're the lifeblood of the business.
In fact, that's a good point. We've done a bunch of co-travel, and part of it was, you'd pull a Shine practice analysis, another sort of deep dive, maybe for a high level for a lot of the Shine clients that are on tonight's course. What are some of the resources that Shine has that they could ask today, and what sort of costs run for that sort of help?
Sure. And the first one I'll say now being on this side of the business within practice transitions, and I don't think the industry does enough of them is the practice valuation. I think if you own the business, you have to constantly be considering your exit plan, your overall retirement strategy. God forbid if something happens to you, what is that plan? Do you have a system in place to protect the practice, to protect your family? Every day that practice doesn't sell, heaven forbid something happens, the likeliness that it will is slim to none. And the value of that business drastically goes down. My recommendation is no matter what stage you are within your career, you should do a proper appraisal of the business. And through that, you're looking at every department within the practice along with the financial data to see, compared to the market, compared to the income approach, the asset approach of the business, what is the true value? And if you're not at the stage of retirement and you have that time, we can together look at strategy to say, okay, this is where you are. We have to make sure when you are ready to retire, the last 3 years is very important. Often at times I see declining revenues. Doctors start to scale back a bit, refer more out. But those 3 years are pivotal to receiving the highest value possible. So I would encourage you do an appraisal. Let's take a look and let's look at ways to increase value, whether it's through production growth, whether it's through balancing overhead, PPO negotiation, you name it. But you don't know until you dive into that data. So it's an open and honest conversation, as a group to say, where are we going next? And it's not about me, it's about you. What do you want to do? Where do you want to take this business? And we let the data speak for itself.
Mm, great. I stopped sharing just because it was, I think, a great piece, and wanted to have a good sort of back and forth flow. The Frank, I gotta ask. Speaking of data, speaking of transitions, based on your experience, you could have gone anywhere, worked for any company, done anything. What was it about the transition side that pulled you back into Shine, and more importantly, got you passionate about jumping in and meeting with those late stage and mid career stage doctors?
Sure. I think early on in my career, I knew when I was a field sales rep covering, cover the boroughs of New York. I always knew I wanted to get into management at the time, but also talk about the business of dentistry. That was always my passion. And for me, having been on the clinical side, running a group, when this opportunity came about, I absolutely knew picking Henry Schein was the right choice. I love the company. I always have. It's been a home to me, a family to me. But it's also because of the resources that we have. They're constantly investing into the resources of the transition sales consultant, utilizing technology. From what I even seen in the market, being on the other side of the house, we have a team of analysts in-house that are partnering with us. We're gathering the data, working with them, and we really make sure that these valuations are perfect to give our buyers and our sellers, the best data points possible to either sell or acquire a practice. There's too many times where you see that there's missed data points, right? So you have to make sure you're doing this right. Shine is certainly aware of that. We have more access to buyers than anybody. I think we have 36,000 buyers in our network. And just, carrying that Shine name really says something. So between the resources and the reputation and the culture, it's important as a buyer or a seller that you have to think about these things and the partners that you choose.
That's great. I appreciate that, Frank.
Yeah.
It's a unique perspective, and I was just sort of pulling up in the background a little bit is these pieces. First of all, there's no shortage just looking in New Jersey, but of course across the country. How we look at data is everything. The amount we've done now with AI and 33 years worth of data, let it be through our Salesforce or Microsoft components, etc. It's remarkable how we can help to get the right message in front of the right doctor at the right time. Let it be a doctor that's talking to Frank about planning their upcoming transition. And hey, what does it mean if I sold to corporate, Frank? What does it mean if I sold privately? What does it mean if I sold to my associate, which I want to pick your brain on, Frank? But there is no shortage. If you can see this part of my screen, is just hundreds and hundreds. Like we've got over 2,363 dental tenant pieces of information just across New Jersey alone. When we actually look at some of the real estate data, it's 150,000 different properties. So, you know, every single day, the best time to start a lease negotiation is 2 years prior to the renewal. Unfortunately, the average doctor typically 2, 3 months prior to. So the more time, the more leverage, and really looking at it through the eyes of the buyer is such a key critical component. Within any of these components, looking at demographics, rental rates, vacancies, comp reports, you name it, but the ability to schedule a time with a company, right, like Shine, Cirrus, etc. And we've been a proud now 15-year contracted partner, Frank, thanks to a lot of your support and success. But things like demographics, traffic patterns, how many people really come through? What do we know about the landlord? What do we know about the anchor tenants and the change? What are they? What are other tenants paying for? What's the current availability? All these sorts of things is a huge component where if you haven't checked your rent to market price, right, could be a massive difference. And look at this. Here we are, one sale. Now this was a group of properties, but it sold for $1.2 billion last year. So if that gives you a little sense of what the incentive might be for the landlord, certainly goes a long way. So let's touch on that other piece for a second, Frank, because that's a big one. We talk about the financial pieces, but the biggest question I see one pop through: selling corporately, selling privately, or selling to an associate. Frank, let me put you on the spot there.
Yes.
You've seen it all from both sides. Give us a sense of what the process is and some of the current pros and cons, because there's no shortage of rumors and
Yeah.
anecdotal pieces about Dr. Smith that sold to a DSO and someone else that sold to an associate or otherwise. But your sense of those three different veins, if you've some of these mid-career doctors are thinking about each of those now.
Sure. I think overall we'll touch on it. You classify the national DSOs, dental service organizations. You also have regional groups. I think you're seeing, still an existence of regional group practices. They could be privately owned. They might be, PE backed, in some cases, yes and no. And they have, an acquisition model, right? Every model is different. I would say the cliche is you've seen one DSO, you've seen one DSO. I think overall there might be this stigma, out there that you don't necessarily want to work for one, but often at times I would disagree. It depends on the individual for sure. Plenty of, associates coming out of school, working for a DSO, learning how to be a dentist, right? Getting their timing down, getting their speed and technique down. It definitely can work, and the opportunity might be there. So I think that is a good segment. But let's talk about, where do I sell? And I hate to say this, but it does depend. It depends on the seller and their goals. So, for example, I would say, and I hear this quite a bit, I might want to sell to a DSO because I'm going to get this high multiple of earnings. Now, historically, I would say in the heyday, a few years ago, there was a higher multiple of earnings. And I don't have the source data to provide the fact, but you can research it yourself. We're seeing a decline in that, right? The money isn't what it used to be with rising interest rates, what's happening in the marketplace today. So you might not be getting that golden multiple of EBITDA that you once, your colleague might have gotten, right? So think about that before you strictly consider selling to a DSO. Not saying it's a bad option. Evaluate all of your options. We do, right? If I'm selling a practice, I'll entertain, and I ask my sellers, are you willing to entertain every option? If you tell me no to a DSO, I won't entertain that. But we can explore it. But also be prepared that you might not receive all of your earnings up front at once. Right? There might be a multi-year, anywhere from 3 to 5 years of a commitment that you have to work in that practice as an associate. For me, if we bought a practice, we depended on an owner doctor staying on for at least 2 years. And that was just our regional model because we struggle and DSO struggle with the same things that you do as a solo practitioner, finding staff. It is a big problem today. And the second part of it is if I find a doctor, can they match the production that you were doing? Can they do the specialty work if you were advanced in your training? Can they do molar endo, molar extractions? In many cases, it's not the case. I see doctors that restore implants, they don't place. So these are the questions you have to ask, and the DSO is struggling with that same thing. So again, it depends. It depends on the doctor. It could be a good opportunity, but evaluate the options and don't do it alone. Make sure that you have a team behind you negotiating on your behalf of what that structure looks like, because you want to overcommit yourself if that's not what you truly want to do, right? Let's move to that next segment of an associate. Mentorship is key, right? Funny enough, I was thinking about this in prep, and I had 20 plus associates, and I had a consultant. He was a friend of mine, and he said, how many kids you have? And I said, two. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And he goes, well, how many associates do you have? And I said, 20. And he goes, well, you have 22 kids. And it's stuck with me because for me, that's leadership, right? You have to really be invested in their growth clinically, professionally, and understand what their goals are as a provider, but also as an entrepreneur. Do not be blind to the fact that they might want to very well own a business, but maybe perhaps they could do that with you, right? They could have that partnership. Is it a good fit culturally, professionally? Can that work? I see it all the time. I'm working on a couple right now where there's a buy-in opportunity. The first step in that is a practice valuation. And be aware of this. It has nothing to do with I'm doing X production, my associate is doing Y. You value the practice as the practice. You're not necessarily going to look at the production of the associate. And again, have representation, because if that associate that's planning to buy in disagrees with the value of that practice, well, now there might be some negotiating that takes place. But also education, right? Educating them on why we've gotten to this number, right? And how we have to base it in an unbiased form that the value of this practice is in its entirety inclusive of your production doctor, and you're buying into the fair market price of this practice. And that's okay. But I think evaluate your team, and have these conversations early if that is the plan. But be prepared if that deal falls through. It could happen for a multitude of reasons. There's disalignment in negotiations. Maybe financing falls through that you thought they've had and things were good. Life happens. So be prepared that you might have to put that practice or that share of the practice on the market. And ask yourself, could you get a higher return by doing that? Maybe you don't want to. Maybe it's not just about the money. Maybe you want to bring on this associate at a lower rate. Who knows? But look at every option before you make that final decision because it's a big one.
I gotta say, Frank, it's of the hundreds of these we've done, including a ton of right true practice meccas. No one's really explained it quite as succinctly and detailed as that. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
It's because it's interesting and it is custom and it is, should I do this? Should I do that? You're right. The answer does come back to get the facts to make the right facts. Same in that same sort of vein, the same thing that, and I'll pick your brain on that in a second, Frank, again, to the mid-career doctor, what are some key things that can be done? The first is, as Frank was saying, obviously, yes, there is a ton of conversations and still is based on the proverbial EBITDA, right? All of those earnings and or normalized earnings, which is just a fancy way of looking at it to say, look, how successful is the clinic? So it can be based on total revenue or it can be based on that sort of profit and earnings type of thing. To Frank's point earlier, well, look, you can try to negotiate your way down and negotiate, if your total merchandise bill is 5.5% and you've got Sally at the front desk constantly focused on saving 2 or 3 cents on a cup and glove and cotton roll. There is, now to Frank, your point earlier, usually 8.5% of the revenue, or in some other cases, 20+% of the revenue going towards the landlord. So that can be a huge boat anchor of a challenge. So part of this is just some of the seven main financial variables that we really do focus on in the negotiation or renegotiation. So for all of you that are mid-career, typically most will give you guidance that you really want a 10-year roadmap to a profitable and successful exit. To do so, obviously, negotiating a new long-term lease is key. The banks will not issue a long-term loan if there's insufficient term on the lease. So, the ability to squeeze. Most doctors focus on the first half of the first page and not realize that the first thing Frank's going to do when he looks at your lease is to go to the assignment section, as we'll look at some examples. And if it says that the landlord will not allow you to assign the lease or can terminate the lease just for asking to sell, that is the major red flag that can stop the whole process across the board. So maybe on that vein as well, Frank, again, a lot of the attendees mid-career, what are some of the key things for the doctors to say, look, Frank, I'm not yet ready, but I sure do want to find out what my clinic is worth. But more importantly, what's that 5 or 10 year roadmap now that you've seen it from all sides?
I think it's a great question. I think once you've done evaluation, then you have the strategy sessions and, be realistic within yourself of what that timeline looks like, because it helps us in preparing that roadmap for you. I think the first thing that I'm doing, I'm breaking it down by category. I'm doing a, hard look at the staff, seeing, and rank them, right? See who is aligned with the mission, vision, and values of the business. Because at the end of the day, it's not just you as a dentist. You are not on an island here. The staff will make or break that practice, especially from my old world, a check in and check out, right? If you're not collecting money properly, if you're not rescheduling appointments, and candidly, that was an issue for us and something that we constantly focused on. So invest in that team and invest in your billing team and RCM, make sure that they are aligned, but also be very transparent with them. And this was something that was new to the team when I joined, but I'm open with sharing the data with the team. I want them to know the success. I want them to know why we do what we do. And it makes them feel like they're a part of it. And I incentivize them to do that, right? There's bonus structures that you can create to do that, which we can certainly talk about. But I think you have to be aligned with the team. Without a good team, you're really nothing, in my opinion. It's so important. But also, if you're in network, I think most, I would say over 60% of dental practices right now are in network with some form of PPO. My recommendation immediately, if you want to drive revenue is take a look at your fee schedule and ask yourself, when was the last time I truly balanced it? Not just raised it, balanced it to a given percentile. If you're in network, you really want to be within that 70 to 80th percentile. And the question I often get is, well, collections or my UCR, my usual customary reasonable fee, is a fake number. It's actually not the case. Everything is based on that gross production, right? Your gross versus net. Now you want to put yourself in a negotiable, a place with the PPOs, and don't do it yourself because they're getting more and more complex. We could spend an entire session on that,
Mhm.
but take a look at your PPO makeup and consider proper negotiation that will immediately drive revenue. You make your small investment year one, but year two, three, and beyond, you're going to see more, and it's a no-brainer. And take a look at your AR. I think that's important too. And these are just quick wins, right? These are quick wins to take a look at my billing process to maximize, immediate return on investment.
Yeah, that's great, Frank. I appreciate that. And that's actually a good lead in here. So when we look at things internally, let alone outsourcing, Frank, you created and built or continue to build that practice services division that we've been a proud member of for 15 years. But I guess the question now is, here's the top four, and no surprise, ask any entrepreneur on the planet, what's the biggest frustration? It's people, people, people. You touched on a lot of the financial pressures and revenue cycle management, et cetera, growth, operations. Uh, Building on that a little bit, Frank, how it's tough because there's a resource for everything, there's a cost for everything. But the question comes back to, where is the doctor's best time spent? So, having seen a lot of top organizations that are niche, let it be on the HR side or otherwise, as you were clinical, you got to see it, you got to see the flip side of it. And in some cases, you probably said, hey, I can do this myself. In some cases, you said, I'm going to outsource it to a pro. For the average clinician that you've worked with, what would your guidance be now in terms of the four biggest challenges? What is your guidance to them to say, doctor, this is something you can do yourself or DIY, or this is something, doctor, please, in the essence of time and efficiency, outsource that to a dental specific specialist?
I think outsourcing has become more and more key, even in the DSO space, until it makes financial sense that what you're spending in outsourcing, you can bring in-house, meeting a proper salary, the continue at outsource because you're going to get more team, more people. And if you're off, you work 4 days a week. Well, they're working on that fifth day. Oftentimes they're working on that sixth day, and that's anything from outsourced billing. To me, if it's not generating revenue, it's not worth my staff's time. So that was something immediately that I did. And it was, understanding, first of all, the skill set of the team. And let's face it, things have become so complex these days that it's no fault. You can have the most experienced biller or office manager, and it is just too much for them. And then you run the risk, if that person, heaven forbid, takes a vacation, is the practice going to run? And the answer is it should. And I think dentists, if they're spending too much time outside of treating patients, they're not generating revenue within that business unless they're in a leadership position and they're allocating that time to mentor and coach their clinicians, review cases with them, improve their producers within the practice, right? Now, that owner doctor might have made that choice to then lead the team, stepping away from the chair. But it's very difficult to do that and not see a decline in collections and production, right? So I would say evaluate as much as you can, consider outsourcing your billing, allowing your team to focus on patient care. Most of the time, what's happening now, especially at the desk, is that they don't have time to spend with the patients. They don't have time to help treatment plan, right? Often at times it's the doctor and the assistant, doing the treatment and treatment planning. Doesn't always work that way, right? Because the second that doctor leaves the room, I promise you, they're looking at their dental assistant and saying, hey, do I need that? And oh, by the way, how much is this going to cost? What are my options? My insurance doesn't cover it. What happens next? If you don't have a system around that and you go to the front desk and that checkout, they're on the phone with the insurance company on hold. They don't have time to have that conversation. So, it's constantly causing issue. And I call it the leak in the ship, right? And unless you fix that leak in revenue cycle, it doesn't improve. So outsource that need, outsource eligibility, outsource, I'll post the claim, but let that team manage it with the insurance company. Doesn't need to be done in-house.
Key points. I mean, we see it every day, especially with the rise of AI. Oh, I can try to do this myself. I'll try to do this with my landlord, etc. But you're right. I mean, the biggest difference with a dental clinic is you've got the majority, if not sole breadwinner, 9 to 5 chairside, right? And if not, that should be because that's the biggest use of your time. Everything else is there to support you as the doctor. And yeah, I mean, lease negotiations as a prime example can easily take 30, 40 plus hours, let it be through the financial, the business clauses back and forth, etc. And that's usually the span of 2 to 300 different emails or texts or follow-ups. So landlords know this and know differently. If they see the doctor dealing with them themselves, they love it. First of all, the landlord rarely deals directly with the tenant. More often than not, it's a corporate or, someone that's specialized in it. So the fact that they deal directly with the dentist, they know they can stall, delay, they can get emotional, they can do all sorts of stuff. So the whole premise is, if you see a doctor that's there scouring through LoopNet or searching online on the weekend to look for a different space, my goodness, there are resources that might take us 10 minutes. It could take the doctor, 10 weekends full. And
Right.
life is way too short to be spent spinning wheels.
It's one key point to that, Eric, is double down on what you're good at. Especially when it comes to, we talk about marketing. You can use that same statement in marketing. We talk about what should I market out there to the masses? What do you enjoy doing? What's that type of dentistry that you really enjoy? That's the message that you want to convey. Because if you don't, you might attract patients that don't necessarily abide with what your mission and vision is. But let's move that into real estate. Maybe you have and you enjoy you and maybe you own real estate outside of dentistry and you feel that you can apply some of that knowledge into negotiating the lease. But at the end of the day, this is a major risk to your business. And again, to that second highest piece of overhead. So it behooves you to partner with an expert to do it. But beyond that, how many hours of time is it taking you? The average dentist is making 750 to 1,000 plus per hour. So just multiply that time and how long it's taking you to accomplish any task in the business that you could be doing dentistry. It's just not worth it. Doesn't make financial sense.
That's key. And, most doctors, it's one of the extra pieces to think on top of working every day to thinking about, gosh, this one case from yesterday or this really complicated thing coming up next week or the staffing issues, etc. There is so much of the mind share of thinking about the actual clinical side that all these other pieces are just a huge and can be a big slush ball. Um, Trends, Frank. So, I mean, we are consistently seeing a massive increase in rents and overhead. We just saw the inflation data today, 4 odd percent, not a surprise based on fuel prices, etc. But especially within the clinic, cost pressure is unbelievable. A doctor today sent me their details and the renewal. So just in a renewal, they've exercised their 5-year option. The landlord increased their rent from $24 per square foot to almost $90 per square foot. Like just remarkable, like 3 to 4 times type of remarkable. So this is the type of thing to say, my God, either A, they're obviously trying to push the doctor out or redevelop or whatever the place may be. But ultimately, these are the type of things that we see every single day that can be completely avoidable as long as we don't miss some of the critical dates. And, one key piece as a key takeaway and knowledge pearl for today is, it takes on average 18 to 24 months to pick up and relocate a clinic. Landlords know this. So if again, the optimum time to start the renewal negotiations is 2 years prior to the lease expiry. Full stop. Because that just gives more term and leverage. Every day that passes, the landlords realize that they can increase their profit without a penny of additional expense just by laying it out. And then in this particular case, if you miss that 6 or 12 months, every single landlord's lease has what I call a little bit of a poison pill, which basically states that, look, Dr. Simo, if you want to stay, no problems. You have 2 5-year renewal options to stay. However, you must give us written notice via carrier pigeon and registered mail when the sun is aligned with Venus type of thing, right? To state that at least 12 months prior. And if you miss that date by a day, those options are null and void. And that's exactly what happened to a doctor this morning. So, this is the reason why we're sort of screaming from the rooftops and truly looking creatively on these sorts of pieces because, again, the rent expense should be closer to 6%, let alone the 8, let alone 10, let alone 20%, because fast forward to when you go to Frank to transition, suddenly now if 10, 20% of your revenue is going towards tenancy expense, then all the focus isn't on all the great clinical and all the other great work you've done. It's now how do I deal with this lease and this massive expense? On that note, Frank, I just pulled up a couple of examples here, but trends that you're seeing across the board, Frank, especially coming from the clinical side and now back in on the corporate side.
I think if you ask any dentist right now across the country, if they've been practicing for a while, it's they're working harder than ever before. They're making less. Insurance companies are reducing rates. They're reducing them drastically. I personally had to negotiate myself with a payer. We received a random phone call that they were dropping our rates 25%. Kid you not. And we were able to negotiate that. But had I not have any level of proper negotiation experience, they would have just done it. And as a matter of fact, they were going to do it because we accepted plans at a lower rate because we wanted to serve the community. And that is the truth. And this is happening every single day. We're seeing the pressure within staff. Very difficult right now to find associates and hygienists along with the admin staff, but they're also asking for some of the highest, comp rates hourly that I've seen, in my almost 20 years in the business. So overhead is constantly getting higher and higher. And I think there has to be a focus on efficiency, production growth. That's why outsourcing is key and really partnering with the right staff members. Because if you're going to keep your staff, invest in them properly, but make sure that they are best suited for your business and have your best interest in mind. Because if not, they are an expense and a rising expense. So make sure that you choose wisely in the team that builds around you and your work.
That's key. The one thing I'll add is the planning side, right? All too often, my godfather was a great example. He was out golfing, right? Took the wrong divot in the sand bunker and tore his rotator cuff and didn't think too much of it at the time. Went through it, afterwards. My dad, who was his physician, was sort of sitting in the chair and my uncle was doing one of these and sort of holding this up and saying, "Gosh, what's wrong?" And lo and behold, it was because of that one little divot that when they went into the orthopod went in, there wasn't enough left of cartilage, had to sell the clinic right away. So, we never want to think morbidly. I stalled and delayed on some of my will and estate planning exercises because you never want to think about the inevitable. But, it's just as important now as Frank and I both have our 2 kids each, right? It's thinking about it not only from the assets, but also the liability. And we've seen too many examples where tragically the doctors passed away, especially if they own the real estate. And if there isn't a clear delineation of what that looks like to a buyer, especially because corporate buyers typically don't want the real estate, the ability of separating that real estate between the real estate corporation, the practice corporation becomes key. So key lead into this, which is look, whether you own the building or lease the building, there's pros and cons for each. We can all make money in real estate as long as we live long enough, but certainly in major urban centers, it's just not a reality. But right, for those of you that do, and I think, 90% lease, but for those of you that don't, one of the key things that we always suggest is to plan for that emergency exit. So one of Frank's colleagues, Greg Auerbach, and I did one of these not too long ago, and we were specifically talking about the emergency exit and the stats that Greg shared from the transition side. Basically, if the clinic doesn't sell in the first 90 days, it doesn't sell at all, and every day and week that passes has a significant diminishing return. So the solution to all of this is, heaven forbid, if you were to pass away, does your estate want to keep the real estate as a passive form of income? If so, are you paying yourself rent today, or what rent would that be when you do go to sell? Right. And also, is there a separation between church and state between the two? That's good for liabilities and IRSs and all those other sort of core components. In the essence of time, I won't cover on this too much, but again, this is just some of the key things that if you haven't had the conversation with your professional team, you should sooner than later. And that's for a few reasons. One is you want to have that good long-term plan, and heaven forbid, if the slush ball does hit you or your family, right, is there a core plan? So that's if you own the building. A couple of examples here, good for a screenshot. The lease is another big one, right? On your phone, please make sure you know when your lease expires. Number two, please make sure you know when that option to renew deadline is. And if you miss it, the landlord can absolutely throw the book at you, as I was describing this morning. Again, transition time frame. Have you chatted with? Have you had a practice analysis? Have you got the feedback in terms of what options you may have or want to do? And at least if you've got a plan, that's key. If not, if there's things like demolition, relocation, there are some even bigger poison pills. And most of you will be shocked to realize you may have a personal guarantee, or it might even continue after you were to sell the clinic. So I'll pull up the example of the assignment clause, Frank, but specifically to the transition side, anything to add on some of those components?
As far as assignments specifically, it's the first thing we
Yeah.
look at, oddly enough. I mean, we look at rental rates, but the first thing I'll do is open a lease and check, is the lease assignable? Because if the doctor wants to sell and it's not assignable, well, that's a problem for all parties involved, right? So that needs to be adjusted prior to doing anything. So as you consider negotiating the lease, that is something that's often at times overlooked, and could pose a problem for you.
So here's one that we pulled, and we've actually updated some of the language to see exactly what landlords are asking for now in the lease, now more than ever. And there was actually some other examples I could switch over and pull up, but landlords are actually putting in language. One the other day, Frank, $50,000 cash,
Mhm.
right, plus tax, just for the seller to the buyer. So Frank, as you sit down with a client, you get their lease, you just part of the due diligence, and you look at it. I'll put you on the spot as well, and you're flipping through some of these. What are some of the first things you look at here in terms of the lease, and or red flags?
Well, the first thing I looked at is what you just highlighted in red, that we need proper consent of the landlord to do this, right? So what is that relationship with the landlord? Do they know that you are planning to sell the practice? What is the timing? And how are we going to have that conversation? All right. So if you are not prepared to do that, you might need a representative to assist you, especially if the lease is not assignable. I think that poses a drastic problem there for you.
Yeah, the other one that's interesting too here that I've highlighted is this is one actually Frank and I were in Vegas for Thrive Live, and the doctor's husband came up and said, you're not going to believe it. This recently happened to me where I went to the landlord. I introduced myself. I said, look, my wife and I are looking to buy the clinic and we're looking to become your tenants and move in. And, we're looking forward to a long-term future together and just wanted to introduce myself. And the landlord went back to the doctor. This is in Northern California, Frank. Went back to the dental husband and said, how much you paying for that? Gosh, that's my building. That lease is coming up soon, and I think I've even got a termination right in there. How much you paying for this thing? Oh, he said, "Well, I don't want to disclose, but it's certainly high six figures type of thing." And the landlord said, "What? For my space? Come on!" Right? He said, "Look, I can do a deal with you directly. Right? How much is that clinic worth without the keys?" And suddenly, the dental husband sort of started to say, "Oh my God, I never even thought of that." Went back to the wife, and of course, the wife, as the dentist, hey, no, this is, the proper and ethical thing to do is to buy the clinic and have a nice, smooth transition and beyond. But just to go to show, this is the clause that was in that lease, which basically gave the landlord the ability to say thumbs up, right? I like Dr. Simo, fantastic. I will agree to transfer the lease from seller to buyer, or thumbs down. I do not like the color of Frank's white shirt. Or number three, not only do I not like it, I can terminate the lease on the actual date of the proposed closing. Nothing will ruin Frank's day as a transition consultant than having a deal die at the 11th hour. And trust me, if that is your, 30 years worth of hard work, one tiny little sentence can throw it all away.
Eric, I have to bring up two quick stories because this always sticks with me throughout my career. I had a doctor, it was years ago, and we read his lease and we wanted to negotiate it. And in the lease, it stated that when he was ready to sell that practice, he had to pay the landlord 50% of what he sold it for. And he had an attorney sign off on that. It's mind-boggling. And another scenario that I felt really bad for this client, it was in New York City. We had advised them the lease was coming up for expiry. And we said, look, this is the time, let's negotiate the lease. And they actually declined. And NYU bought the building and they kicked them out and they had to find another space. These things happen so often. There's so many stories that just come to mind.
On that note, one of our mutual clients ran into the situation that years ago was into a forced relocation. And without really having much time, energy, and effort, had to immediately try to find the closest space, build it as quickly as possible. Wasn't ideal, two different levels, etc. And that now, 10, 15, 20 years later, can still be a resounding challenge. So, it is the type of things we never want to think about, but that's key. And then, yeah, if you're thinking, doctors, this is nuts. I can't believe this is happening. How is this going to happen to me? This one little clause is exactly how the landlords can say, look, if you're getting any sort of money, cash goods or equivalent, the word is consideration. If you see that consideration word in your lease, right? Do not stop, do not collect $200, do not pass go, right? Definitely create a strategy to have someone professionally remove this for you, renegotiate it for you, and beyond. And lastly, at the very bottom here is that the tenant shall not, the last two or three lines, shall not be released from its obligations under this lease. Almost every single lease, the doctor is shocked to realize that even after I sell, they will remain as personally and corporately liable as they are today. And that doesn't mean even till the end of the term. If that lease continues to renew indefinitely, you are on the hook indefinitely. So, goes without saying, the cost impact can be in the hundreds of thousands, and all can be very, very preventable across the board. So, as we wrap, and I'll pull up a quick little poll in a second on how to get in touch with Frank and get some more information. You might not be ready, you might still be in the very confidential stage, but I would strongly encourage if you are thinking of selling within the next 5 to 10 years, just pick up the phone, call Frank, have a good conversation to get a good perspective. Number one, get all the documentation, right? One of the first things Frank's going to ask is, do you have a signed copy of your lease? So many doctors have just their own signature, sent it back. The landlord never signed it. It's not worth the paper it's written on. So, do you have signed agreements, employment agreements? That's a whole other webinar, right? Do you have signed employment agreements with all your key staff, all your staff, let alone key staff? Number two is, have you figured out your goals, right? Everyone asks, well, what do you think of? Are you thinking of selling? Would it be corporate? Would it be this? There's never a set answer, but there is a sort of choose your own adventure path for each. And you want to be able to know what each of those look like, as Frank was referencing before on the saleability side. Number three goes without saying, if you haven't had your lease professionally reviewed, if you have not compared your rent to market price in the last couple of years, a great opportunity to do so. Start with the facts, right? Rental rates, vacancies, comp reports are a big part of what we do. Number five is obviously then figure out that carefully choreographed game of chess. Frank eloquently described a bunch of the different perspectives and options and things to think of. But when looking at it, what have we not done yet? We have not picked up the phone and called the landlord to say, "Hey, I just watched this great webinar with Frank and Eric. I can't believe that, hey, Mr. Landlord, what do you want to charge me in rent?" Right? Or, "Hey, I'm going to sell my clinic next week." Right? Really make sure that you've got a long-term plan in place, even if you're not thinking of selling for the next 5 years or otherwise, worth that quick conversation. And there's a ton of things that can be done today, like renegotiating the lease, like referring less out, like refocusing on the hygiene program. There's a ton of things that can be done to drive that production up in preparation for sale, then negotiate and basically not stop until you get to a final form lease that you're satisfied with. We're going to pull up a poll, but Frank, on that last note, the biggest nugget of all, there'll be a quick section here at the bottom to request some follow-up from Frank and his team as well as ourselves. But that's the biggest piece is what are some key things today, Frank, that if you were sitting down with a doctor, let's say in their 50s, and they've got another 5 to 10 to 15, no real immediate plans to do it, but their wife may be retiring or husband might be retiring in a few years, what are two or three main things that you would advise the doctor to do today in order to dramatically impact the saleability and proceeds from the sale?
Like we talked about, proper exit planning. You never know what life is going to bring you, so make sure that you have a plan in place, both in the short term and the long term. Build the team, right? You're not on an island in what you do, and it's important. I think often at times the stigma of talking to a broker, a transitions consultant like myself, is when you're ready to just sell the business. I can't tell you how many times I just tell a doctor, I wish I met you sooner, because we uncover the pitfalls that we could have likely fixed if we had met 2, 3, 4 years earlier. So build the team, partner with a broker locally if they can assist you. We have a team around the country in all 50 states that can do that. But we also have a pretty wide Rolodex of individuals that can support you. Dental specific attorneys, lease negotiators, accountants, we'll bring all of that to you and help you in your strategy. And the first thing that we're going to do, if it's early enough and we have time, we're going to go over the entire practice department by department. 65% of the work you guys do doesn't come from new patients. It comes from existing patients. Let's look at that. Let's see where your statistics are. Dive into the production summaries, the fee schedules. Partner with people that know mesial and distal, that can speak the lingo and understand, and help you along the way. But most of all, it's about you and your goals. No practice is the same. It's all about you and your personal goals. We just want to help you get there and get there the right way. So we're open books, but we look forward to the opportunities to help.
Perfect. Thank you so much for everyone's time. Greatly appreciated. We will process the CEs in approximately 10 business days. Frank, that was fantastic. We will share, upload. That'll get into the Google Geminis and all the world, and we'll take all that knowledge nuggets and hopefully end up in some chat GPTs or otherwise elsewhere. But truly appreciate your insight, Frank. And Frank, what's the best way that people can get a hold of you?
Best way is either email or cell. My email is belowfrank.simo@henryshein.com, and my cell number 631-943-2325. Call or text. Happy to help you.
Perfect. Bang on for time, Frank. Can't thank you enough. Greatly
Yeah.
appreciated, sir. Good luck with the kiddos, and congratulations on the next big step in your career.
Appreciate everything, Eric. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.